Today we are doing transmission oil service on this Cub Cadet GT54D Fab lawn tractor. I will go over the specs on this tractor, as well as just some general discussion topics about lawn tractors and manufacturers and componentry and things of that nature. So after that I'll get into the oil change itself. Jumping straight in here, we have a Kohler KT740 engine, which is rated at 25 horsepower. The deck is fabricated. It is a 54-inch deck as indicated in the name, and it also has a Tuff Torq K62 transmission or transaxle, and this variety has the diff or differential lock. So what have I learned about lawn tractors? I find it really amusing how Cub Cadet, John Deere, and other manufacturers, they really mix and match componentry, and they try to mix different motors with different transaxles, and some decks are fabricated, some are stamped. And then there's all different ranges of horsepowers, and it's really interesting when you dig into it. One of the things that you'll notice straight away, if you're familiar with Cub Cadet, is this is an XT1 series lawn tractor. They come in XT1, XT2, and XT3. XT1 is the highest level or series that are permitted to be sold in box stores. The others, the XT2s and XT3s, are only sold in the Cub Cadet authorized retailer or retail locations. This particular mower is a big box store mower. It came from Tractor Supply, and the mixture of components on this actually overlaps with what is being sold in the store as an XT2 series mower by Cub Cadet. So same components, but they don't allow it to carry that XT2 designation because it's a box store mower. And this is, just for your information, this is or was the highest spec Cub Cadet lawn tractor that Tractor Supply sold when I purchased it. You could not get this complement of components in a lawn tractor from Home Depot or from other retailers or resellers, I should say. They just didn't have quite a robust setup or set of components. So let's get into this a little bit more. As I mentioned, this is a Kohler KT740 engine. This engine comes in multiple horsepowers from 20 to 26, and what they do is all of the 20 through 25 horsepower engines in this Kohler 7000 series, they're all 725 cc's. They're just in different states of tune to achieve the horsepower ratings, whatever that happens to be. So it's not until you step into the 26 horsepower 7000 series engine that there is actually a slight bump in displacement to 747 cc's. So anyway, I found that interesting. They're building the same engine, same displacement for the most part, and they're just tuning it much the way the automotive industry is doing with cars today. So that was one aspect that I found interesting about this. Also, I should mention that the XT1 and XT2 series Cub Cadets, they all have the same frame. So, they all come at different price points depending on the components, and the XT2s by and large are more expensive, but you're getting the same frame. So, Kohler engine, same frame across the XT1 and XT2 lines. Got the 54-inch fabricated deck, and in the rear here we have the Tuff Torq K62 transmission. This is where you're spending most of your money, at least in my opinion. I'm no stranger to Tuff Torq. and this is not my first rodeo with them. I had a John Deere, somewhat smaller lawn tractor, and it had the dreaded K46 Tuff Torq transmission. And I guess I shouldn't pick because it's not, there are different levels of that transmission, different specs, and each manufacturer specs them out differently depending on the level of lawn tractor that they're selling. But as everyone knows, that particular transmission is known for failing kind of early in its service life. Early meaning 200 hours of service or maybe less, and it's also a non-serviceable transmission. I actually did what many have done. I made it serviceable. I took it apart with the help of a friend. We installed drain plugs into the bottom of the casting on the bottom of the transmission, and then I could change this fluid. I changed the filter, and it was it actually gave me over 300 hours of service. So kind of hard to understand why the manufacturer doesn't just put drain plugs in there and allow you to, at the very least, change the fluid. Moving on, this is the K62 Tuff Torq, and I'll try to add a little bit of light here as we're looking at this. This is a downward view, the fan, and then we have a drain plug, or I'm sorry, a fill plug on the left and a vent cap on the right. This transmission is split into two chambers. There's the gear chamber on the left and the hydrostatic chamber on the right. You have to drain and refill both. In every video I've ever seen of the K62 or the sister, the K66, they all people usually take the transmission out of the lawn tractor. They put it on a bench. Oftentimes, though, they're rebuilding one that has mega hours on it, like 500 or 600 hours of service. This unit is just over 50 hours, so it's really calling for its first oil service. And the filter that's inside the transmission is a lifetime, so there won't be any fussing or messing around with that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a look on the bottom of the unit and indicate where the drain plugs are, and then I'll kind of take you through the process of changing the fluid on this transmission. Okay, I should have taken a moment to mention that I did remove the battery from the lawn tractor, as well as the battery braces. There are two braces here that run across, so just forgot to mention that earlier. So we're going to go down underneath now, and we're going to approach the transmission from the rear of the lawn tractor. I'll get a nice angle here so we can see most of the bolts on the bottom of the transmission casting. So the drain bolts, or drain plugs, if you will, are located here and here. And this one is the gear side. This one is the hydrostatic side. Those are split. You have to take both of them out, and that's the only way to get all the fluid out of the transmission. So, and it looks like there's almost like a little bit of green marking on the bolts. I'm not sure if that's actually the case, but that's what it looks like from here. So anyway, take both of those out, get the fluid drained out, and then when we refill the transmission from the top, we'll do both sides. And again, you've got to remove both because they're separate chambers inside the transmission. And for the record, I am using the Tuff Torq transmission fluid. I understand that there's talk that they've switched to 20W50 or some form of synthetic. Who knows? There's lots of chatter on it about online, and I'm not really concerned. I'm using the genuine article, and perhaps at a later time I'll switch to whatever they've switched to. But right now, this is just an initial service, and I'll see what they've updated or changed at a later time. Okay, let's pick up where we left off. I have drained both sides of the transmission, the hydrostatic side and the gear side. I was able to get 1.1 liters out of the hydrostatic side, 1.2 2 liters out of the gear side for an honest 2.3 liters, presuming this handy bucket is marked correctly. Now, as I mentioned before, I am using the genuine article Tuff Torq transmission fluid. There is some discussion online about Tuff Torq's gone to perhaps a different oil. Maybe it's 20W50 or some synthetic variant or something. But that, again, I'll get into that later if I need to. But this is the genuine article. Now, one thing that is interesting about this is I've gotten 2.3 out of the transmission. It states here on the bottle K62 is 2.5 liter capacity. And if you look at Tuff Torq's website, it actually says 2.6. So we've got 2.6, 2.5, and 2.3. Now, keep in mind, it's impossible to get every single drop of transmission fluid out. You know, I can even look in the fill holes above, or the fill plugs on top with those removed, and see, you know, there's the gears are glistening with oil, and that's just the, you know, unless you do a transmission flush, which I'm not doing here, I don't need to do that, you're not going to get every single drop out of this. But I did just find it kind of interesting that there's a slight variance in the Tuff Torq information on their bottle versus on their website. There's probably a good reason for that. It might be a revision to the transmission or a running change or something like that. Nevertheless, I'm about to start the fill process here, and don't expect any challenges. Like I said, I've got both of the plugs removed on top, so should be pretty straightforward. I'll come back and report in on the progress. A couple of things I forgot to mention. You know, the condition of the fluid coming out of the transmission. It looks fine. It's darker than new, obviously, but it's not black, and there's just nothing that was of alarm or concern there. So it's, you know, it's dirty like it should be. And one of the things I did to get more fluid out of the transmission is I actually rolled the tractor forward and backwards with the transmission engaged. So, you know, you've got this little thing on the back here that engages and disengages, basically puts the transmission in neutral. Well, I left that engaged the full time, and I moved the tractor backwards and forwards, and I just basically moved the bucket along with the tractor. So as additional fluid came out, you know, it did spill on the floor. So this is one job I've done where I haven't made a mess, and I feel good about that. But you know, the point is, you know, the transmission has a pump. It has pistons or plungers, whatever you want to call those, and you will, just by rolling the tractor backwards and forwards just a little bit, you don't have to go very far, you will engage those, and that'll help pump out some additional fluid. Also, as you're going to refill, make sure you have yourself a long snout or long nose funnel like this. This will come in very handy because it's you know, it's a pretty good distance down to both of the fill holes on the transmission. And one other comment is that when before I drained the transmission, I did take a look at how much fluid was in the reservoir. If you've looked at any of this online, you probably know that that reservoir should have some amount of fluid in it. There are actually like hash marks on the side of the tank that tell you, you know, how far or how full it should be. And mine was not. It had, I mean, it wasn't dry. It had some fluid in the bottom of it, but maybe just, I would guess, a couple millimeters, maybe a quarter of an inch. And based on everything that I've read and everything I've seen from the manufacturer, that fluid should have been higher up in the reservoir. So not end of world, it wasn't dry, but when I fill it back up, I'm obviously going to put more in it, and that's probably why I got 2.3 versus something closer to 2.5 or 2.6. Again, those numbers were different depending on where I looked, but and you're not going to get every drop out of the transmission. So on to the next step. Okay, the lawn tractor has been fully reassembled, the transmission refilled, and the fluid topped off. Let's talk about what went according to plan and what did not. Again, 2.3 liters of fluid was removed from the transmission. That's 1.1 on the gear side, 1.2 on the hydro side. I was able to get 2.5 liters of fluid into the transmission, and as expected, 0.2 or 0.2 of a liter was on the hydro side. The reservoir expansion tank, overflow tank, whatever they call it, was low. It wasn't dry, but it was not where it should have been. Should have had a little more fluid in it. So that all went as I expected. What did not work were the instructions provided by Tuff Torq for refilling the K62, and there is a difference, although the K62 and K66 are visually the same transmissions. The refill process is different. And on the K62, you have to perform an air purge process, that is to get the air out of the transmission case. And what they ask you to do is to elevate the rear of the lawn tractor, jack it up, get the wheels free, start the engine, allow the engine to idle, and while you do that, you want to actuate the bypass valve, which is what I call the neutral lever. It's the lever on the back of the transmission you can push in and pull out to engage and disengage the transmission. And then they want you to rock the accelerator pedal backwards and forwards for forward and reverse. And they want you to do that intermittently while the engine is idling. And what they don't tell you, but I'm well aware you have to do, is you have to take the parking brake off on the mower. So the drive belt turns the pulley on the top of the transmission, which in turn activates the oil pump inside the transmission. So, you know, I'm fully aware of that and what needed to happen there, but I did this for quite some time, and I was very patient with it. I did it in different sequences over, I don't know, probably a couple of hours, and nothing was happening. No fluid was being pulled into the transmission. There was no bubbling, nothing. And I got pretty frustrated with it, so I walked away from it. I actually left the transmission reservoir topped off and full overnight, thinking that maybe overnight there would be some fluid that would be pulled into the transmission. Well, not pulled, but just via gravity would make its way into the transmission. Didn't happen. So the next day I got the lawn tractor down off the jack, and with the transmission engaged, meaning the bypass lever or neutral lever pushed in so the transmission is engaged, I rolled the lawn tractor forwards and backwards. So like 5 to 10 feet forward, 5 to 10 feet backwards. And I could immediately hear fluid being pulled into the transmission. There were big gulps of air coming up through the reservoir. Large bubbles at first, smaller bubbles as I continued that process. And eventually it got to the point where there were like little tiny bubbles like you would see carbonation in soda. So I did that several times. Then I allowed the lawn tractor to sit. I walked away, I came back, and sure enough, there was a little bit more air that I could get out of the lawn tractor by pushing it forward and pulling it backwards with the transmission engaged. And eventually you'll notice that it gets harder and harder to push it because that fluid is, it's creating kind of a hydro lock, if you will, inside the transmission. So, after I did that, I took the lawn tractor outside, and I drove it up and down the street. I made sure that the emergency stop was working in forward and reverse, and that everything was okay. So after that, I felt good that it was filled. There was no more fluid being pulled in, and all the air was out of the transmission. So I've done a lot of automotive transmissions, automatics, dual clutch transmissions, transaxles, differentials, front and rear, a lot of projects like that. And I've never seen anything that worked in this manner. And again, I've done the K46, had that entirely apart, and that was a different animal as well. Of course, it has a single chamber, which this transmission has 2 chambers, and this is a much more robust transmission, which is why I bought this lawn tractor. But I've got the experience. It doesn't make me an expert, but this was unusual. And just last comments here. When you purchase this lawn tractor, you will not get anything or see anything in the owner's manual about how to take care of this transmission. Your owner's manual from Cub Cadet talks about the frame and the chassis and basic controls and lighting and wheels and tires and all that stuff, and maybe a little bit about the deck. And then they give you the Kohler 7000 series booklet on the engine, but there's nothing, absolutely nothing included about this Tuff Torq transmission. You have to go to the Tuff Torq website and pull up the diagrams and the documentation and all of that, and/or search on YouTube for answers on how to service this. So I hope this is helpful. This was an interesting project, and I'll know what to do next time. Thank you.